Hi, it's Mo. It is the end of June, and a few months ago I made a video talking about Spy Family. It was a TBR Spin vlog. You can definitely check out all my TBR Spin vlogs down below. I vlog all of my reads for that reading challenge, which was created by Sarah at Freshly Read Books. But I talked about comics and how comics were a big part of my reading. It's something that I've moved away from in more recent years, but not because I don't still love comics and I don't still think that they're a great form of media, and I still love the artwork and I still love the stories and I still love the way that you can tell and portray stories through comics. They're just something that I haven't read as much of, and partly that's because I'm reading a lot more novels and nonfiction and other books, I think. But it made me think about how comics are partly where my lore started. Not only reading comics, but being involved in the comic world, knowing comic book artists and writers, writing and drawing my own comics, and how all of that was extremely influential in my life, and just comics in general were extremely influential in my life. I can't remember if I said this in the other video, but one of my earliest memories is going to the library and picking out comics to bring home and read with my mom. So comics are very important to me, but it got me thinking about that trend that was going around not too long ago, which were the 10 books that made me, or where my lore started. And this is an idea for a video that I've been playing around with for a while now, so I think it's finally time to talk about the 10 books that made me. It's definitely going to be more than 10 books, or where my lore started. So first and foremost, if you're a reader, I think you have series or books or that one pivotal moment of your lore, of your reading journey, of the way you read, what you love to read. I think everybody knows that and feels that when they are a reader and a person who thinks about their reading journey. I definitely have thought about that as well. And if you know one thing about me, if you need to know one thing about me and my reading, you know that my all-time favorite book, a book that I love, a book that I reread constantly on audio, a book that I use to fall asleep, a book that is forever ingrained in my brain, in my heart, and makes up a large portion of my personality, is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Yes, this is my favorite book, my all-time favorite book, above and beyond, head and shoulders above all other books that I've ever read. And partly that's because this is where my lore started. Like, when I first started to read on my own for myself, and the people who were influencing me at that times and the things that were influencing me, this was it. And then I read it over and over and over again from the age of probably like 11 or 12 to now. I am now 46. So it's been a while. I've been reading it for a long time. I had even seen the show. There was a BBC show in the 80s, probably before I read this book, and fell in love with it that way as well. So even before then. So this is definitely like where my lore started. This is the book that made me. If you need to know one thing about me and nothing else, it's that The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is my all-time favorite book. And definitely this series as a whole is my all-time favorite book. I go through periods where Hitchhiker is my favorite. I go through periods where Life, the Universe, and Everything is my favorite. I go through periods where So Long and Thanks for All the Fish is my favorite. But overall, like all together, Douglas Adams in general is my favorite. I also love his Dirk Gently series. Dirk Gently currently is the book that I read every night to fall asleep, pretty much. Or I listen to the original radio scripts. So I am constantly listening to it. I would prefer that not a day goes by that I don't hear Douglas Adams' voice at some point in the day. I love him. I love his ideals. I love what he stood for. I love these books. I love the messaging of his life, basically. He was all about sustainability and technology and using technology to connect with other people. He was all about the idea of technology being used for conservation and many other things. So all around a wonderful person by all accounts. I never got to meet him, unfortunately, but also a wonderful book. Now, is this the typical kind of book that I read now? No. I love British humor. I am definitely an Anglophile in many, many ways, which we'll see come up again and again throughout this video. And I think that humor has come in and out of my reading and has come in and out of my life in various ways, but always kind of exemplified by this book. I do also really love sci-fi. I've always loved sci-fi. I was read A Princess of Mars when I was a kid. I was read other books like the Narnia books, the kind of border on sci-fi and fantasy, the Madeline L'Engle series, A Wrinkle in Time. So I have always really loved sci-fi, and again, like humorous sci-fi has a special place in my heart for sure. We could stop the video there. Like, that's how my lore started. That's all you need to know. But if we go back further to things that I loved as a child, huge fan of Beatrix Potter. I've always been an artist. I've always been an artistic person. Stories and artwork of Beatrix Potter have always been a huge influence on me. I love that these are good-hearted stories, but also a little bit scary. I mean, the story of Squirrel Nutkin, terrifying, you know, the owl, scary owl, also beautiful. Also have instances of a lot of things that I still hold dear today, like community, like kindness, like adventure, like independence, you know? So these books were really important to me, and I've read them since I was like a tiny, tiny child, and I would still read them today. I also think that these books were a huge influence on my audiobook reading, because I had a record, an album, a vinyl record of some of the Beatrix Potter stories, and I would listen to that over and over and over again. I would listen to it to fall asleep when I was little, so it definitely influenced listening to other things to fall asleep, and it definitely influenced listening to audiobooks in general. I also recently realized that I used to listen to this at the high speed because the narrator of the record spoke so slowly. I thought it was like hard to listen to, so I would listen to it fast. And it's funny because now I listen to audiobooks at higher speed when I listen to audiobooks. So definitely this is where my lore started. This is one of the 10 books that made me. Along those same lines, I think picture books, and picture books specifically about cats. So again, these are young books, were very important. Night Cats by Anthony Tabor is one of my all-time favorite picture books, and you can see some blending over of comics with this book as well. This is an absolutely stunningly drawn book, and this book actually has no words. It's just about night cats and what cats do at night, about cats and what they get up to. And this is definitely one of my all-time favorite picture books and a predecessor of all my favorite comics. Absolutely beautiful, and I love this one. So I think comics in general are definitely part of my lore, and picture books are part of my lore, of course. I think everybody has picture books that they love throughout their years. I don't think you're ever too old to read picture books. I don't think you're ever too old to enjoy the books that you enjoyed when you were young. So definitely part of my lore there. As I got a little older, I think I have to say that Francesca Lia Block and Weetzie Bat are some of the books that made me as a reader, made me as a person. This was some of the earlier works that I found on my own, and some of the works that I came to that were queer, that were independent, that were where people were different, but they were celebrated for their differences and made to feel great about their differences, as opposed to ostracized or chastised for their differences. And I loved the Weetzie Bat books so much. Weetzie Bat is about a young girl growing up in LA and her friends and queerness and magic in the world. I haven't read these in a really long time, and I worry that they wouldn't hold up quite as well. I mean, I think they'll still be magical and beautiful, but knowing what I know now about the world, I don't know if they would be as diverse as I would want them to be, and the magic of diversity and the magic of, how do I say this, the magic of the pain of the world might not be showing in these books, but I would be interested to reread them. I mean, they're all extremely short. I remember loving all of the Weetzie Bat books, especially Weetzie Bat and Witch Baby and Angel Wand. Those were all three of my favorites that I can recall. I don't know if I'd want to spoil the magic of them now by rereading them, but on the other hand, I would love to recapture some of that feeling. And again, these were books that I came to on my own, that I read on my own, that I loved, that I reread hundreds of times, and that really impacted me as a human as well as a reader. It's great to come to books on your own, but some books that I didn't come to on my own also impacted me as a reader and as a person. Shakespeare is definitely some of those books. I went to a school that was run by a British woman, and she loved Shakespeare, and we did a lot of Shakespeare work, and we talked a lot about Shakespeare, and we did plays, and we did all sorts of things. A Midsummer Night's Dream probably still is my favorite Shakespeare book. I haven't read Shakespeare in a while. I started reading Antony and Cleopatra a few years ago, but I never finished it. I should get back to that. I haven't read a lot of plays recently, and I think that that would be a fun thing. There was definitely a period of time where I read quite a few plays. So in middle school, pre-high school, I was reading Shakespeare. I was loving Shakespeare. I was going to see Shakespeare. And I think the idea of books that are crazy old, especially when you're a young person, but then have so much relevance to today, are very interesting and have emotions and ideas that you find relevant as a young person definitely influence you. And I think going out and seeing plays and reading being part of community and reading being part of getting out into the world is also very important and very important to my lore. One of my greatest, most magical memories of life was stumbling upon a random group of people doing Midsummer Night's Dream in Washington Square Park in New York when I was a teenager, and it was amazing. It blew my mind. I still think of that. Also having a like cultural reference or a intelligent reference that you knew about as a teenager or as a young person, you know, something that adults study that you could also comprehend, like that you could also look at and enjoy, I think was very influential in my life. So I think that Shakespeare is part of my lore for sure. And then we move on to more books that you might read like in high school. When I was a teenager and a young adult, I found books like The Great Gatsby, which is one of my all-time favorite books. And it was a book that I wanted to read. I heard about somewhere, maybe we were supposed to read it in school and I never did. A lot of the books that I read in school, besides the Shakespeare, I didn't really like. It would be interesting to go back and read some of those books again and try to figure out, with the little time that I spent in high school, if it was just that I hated high school or was it that I actually didn't like those books. But The Great Gatsby is one of those books that's often required reading, so you want to kind of shy away from it as a young person, or you want to not be influenced by it. But I think The Great Gatsby is part of my lore. It kind of introduced me to my love of books about the underdog, you know, about, again, people on the margins, about the idea of being yourself even if you're not like rich or whatever. And definitely this, I think, influenced me a lot in the idea of moral ambiguity, because this is definitely a morally ambiguous book in a lot of ways. And I love the writing, and I love that it's set in New York and set on Long Island. I love the time period, like everything about this book I love, and so this one definitely has to be one of my lore. I think around that same time, young adult, early adulthood, I read Cannery Row by John Steinbeck. I really love John Steinbeck's writing. I haven't read too many of his books, and I haven't read the more famous ones. This is probably not one that you were required to read in school, but something about this and my lore is that I read this with a friend and we would read this out loud to each other. So reading out loud has always been a huge part of my reading. My parents read to me out loud when I was a kid, like I mentioned, and then that idea of sharing books, of reading books with friends, not just reading them separately and talking about them, which I love to do and is very important about the book community, but reading them together and influencing each other and discussing text and reading out loud and sharing that experience, I think is very important. And I think is part of my lore, is part of the 10 books that made me, because like here I am sharing books with you on the internet and wanting to connect with people on the internet about books and wanting to connect with friends about books and reaching out to people and finding people in my life who love books. I'm not one of those people who joined BookTube because there's no one to talk to about books. My husband reads, my father reads, my mom reads, my boss reads, my friends read. So I have always sought community through books, and this is just one more step. BookTube BookTube is just one more step towards doing that. So I think Cannery Row is a great example of that in my lore. And then we have the Dharma Bums, which again, around the same time, that like new adulthood, I was moving out of the house. I was on my own in a lot of respects. Even when I was still living at home, I was exploring, becoming an adult. And this was a book that people said, oh, you have to read, you have to know about. This is an aspect of life that you've never known and that you may never know. I love the Dharma Bums. I loved On the Road. I loved learning about the beats. And I think that these, although they're very different books, are weirdly similar in the idea of young men trying to find themselves. And I always identified more with young men trying to find themselves than with women trying to find themselves, at least in literature, because women finding themselves often had to do with starting families, falling in love, trying to find themselves within the confines of societal norms, whereas books about young men finding themselves were men living outside of those norms. And so I think that that was very influential to me in a lot of ways and made me who I am today and helped me understand that there were different paths, that there were different lives, that there were different things that you could do as a person and be as a person. So books like The Dharma Bums, other Jack Kerouac novels, and other novels that had queer people in it, that had sex in it, that had drugs in it, things like that really opened my eyes to different lifestyles, which I think is part of my lore. Next, we can talk about Survivor. Now, this is when I was much older. I loved Chuck Palahniuk. I probably started reading his stuff after watching Fight Club, thinking that was a great movie, and then reading his books. I definitely read Fight Club, although it's not one of my favorites. Survivor and Rant, I think, are probably my two favorites of his books, and this is one that I've read over and over and over again. And I loved this book because it was weird. So I think part of my lore and part of the 10 books that made me have to go to weird books that played with time, books that played with the border between reality and unreality, books that played with science or the idea of, science is not necessarily the right word, but all Palahniuk's books do have a little science aspect in them. The idea of the mundane science. In Survivor, it's cleaning, using chemicals to clean things. In Fight Club, it's soap. In Rant, it's rabies. Like, there's this idea of taking something that is solid, that is controlled, that is understandable like science, and twisting it to show how people differ and how you can use different chemicals for different things, and how chemistry, between elements and science and chemistry between people are connected in some way, So I really love Survivor. I really love Chuck Palahniuk's writing. I most recently read Invisible Monsters again. I reread it again since BookTube, so I will try to find that review and leave it here. But again, Palahniuk was a book that I discovered on my own, that I found that was my book. Other people weren't reading it, and I got other people to read it in my life, and that was something that books led me to do. Finding that community, influencing people, trying to share my love of books and of the books that I love with other people. I think another book that would go in this area in my life, in this part of the 10 books, is The Rorschach Text. I love that book by Stephen Hall. It's one of my favorites. I reread it every few years, and it plays with language, it plays with writing, it plays with time. But at their heart, all these books have to do with like people and connections and love and respect and being different, and even in your differences we're the same, and even in our sameness we have differences. Moving on to part of my reading that I haven't talked about yet but is extremely influential in my reading, and we're gonna call that the cozy mystery era. I love cozy mysteries. I always watched Agatha Christie. I always watched adaptations on PBS of the Inspector Morse books and all those kind of books. But in my mid-adulthood to late adulthood to now, I've definitely read a lot of cozy mysteries. My all-time favorite mystery writer is P.D. James. She is British, again, showing my Anglophile side. And these, I couldn't pick just one P.D. James because all these P.D. James books are all in the Adam Dalgliesh series, but they're all basically the exact same story, just in different locations and with like slightly different like background information. And I love all of them. The Black Tower, The Lighthouse, and Death in the Holy Orders. I don't know what's my favorite. Maybe The Black Tower or Death in the Holy Orders. I don't know. They're they're all the exact same book, so does it really matter? But I love mysteries. Mysteries give you a feeling in reading that you don't get anywhere else. Even when you're watching a TV show adaptation, even when you're watching a TV show, there is nothing like reading a mystery and being gripped by a mystery. More recently, at the beginning of my booktube journey, I read Into the Woods by Tana French. I thought that was, Tana French? Yeah, Tana French. That like gripped me, and it gave me that like excitement of reading, that reading could be as gripping not only as reality, but as your favorite movie, as your favorite TV show. And that's how I feel when I read P.D. James. I'm totally gripped by them. That's a feeling that I love. And as a reader, I think that's very important and influential to my reading. So those, I would say, are the 10 books that made me. How many books is it really? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, but this counts as one. So 11, those were like, give or take 11 books. And then I mentioned a handful of other ones that I would say made me, that I would say were my lore. If you need to know something about me, you need to know that. But since joining BookTube, something else has changed, and you might notice it. If you can look at these books and see one not nice similarity between all these books, like what is it? It's white authors. I read almost exclusively white authors. I don't remember reading a single black author or a single person of color for such a long time. And I think that something that BookTube has done for me, which is amazing, is introduce me to so many amazing authors of color, so many amazing black authors, so many amazing authors that are writing in different languages from English, something else that I didn't really read on my own or from influence from other people for such a long time. And now I am reading those things, and it has changed my reading so completely and so amazingly and so much for the better, and I'm so much better off for it. And my lore is that I am such a better person for reading people of color, for reading queer works, for reading works not in my language, for reading works by different cultures than me, different ethnicities than me, different religions than me. It's huge. It's a huge impact, and it is a huge impact on everyone, and it will be a huge impact on you if you have not done it yet, but I would definitely highly recommend it. Something else that's changed in my reading since joining BookTube, if I've read a lot more, not nonfiction, because I always read nonfiction, which I do want to talk about, but more social nonfiction, more socially aware books in fiction and nonfiction, books that are important to Americans in society, to the world society, to underprivileged populations, to learning about oppression, to learning about all of those things than I've ever read before. And I think the autobiography of Malcolm X is probably one of the most influential books I've ever read, because this really started me off on not only wanting to read more social books, social justice books, not only wanting to read more about American history than I was ever taught in schools, but it also led me down a path of black authors in general. This book is famously told to a black author, Alex Haley, but it is Malcolm X's story. So this led me down a whole rabbit hole of learning about American history, the American history that we're not taught in schools. And then fiction books have also played a really important role in that as well. So reading authors like Toni Morrison, like Zora Neale Hurston, like James McBride, like various other black authors who are writing about the black experience in America is also super influential. Reading books by people of colors from different places. I was always interested in Japanese books, and I had read Japanese books previously, but reading Korean translated books, reading books from Africa that are translated from different languages, reading translated work in general and seeing different cultures through books has been very, very influential in my reading in the last 5 years and has changed my life for the better, so it is definitely part of my lore. Again, going back to nonfiction, this is The Professor and the Madman. I did always read nonfiction. I did always like nonfiction. This book, Cod or The Big Oyster by Mark Kurlansky stand out to me. The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson stand out to me. So I always did read nonfiction, but I think reading nonfiction, and specifically social nonfiction, whether that be memoirs, like most recently I read On Juneteenth, which is part history and part memoir, memoir have been extremely influential to me, but again, reading these works by Black authors, whereas before I read almost exclusively white authors, reading by people of color, reading about experiences and histories in America and all over the world by people of color has been a huge influence on me and is definitely now part of my lore. That's a lot. That's a lot to process. It's a lot to go over. It's hard to say your entire reading life and your entire books that made you or your reading lore in, 20 minutes or so. Hopefully not too much more than 20 minutes. So let me know what you thought of that. Let me know if you have similar experiences to me. Let me know what your takeaways from this video are, and definitely let me know what some of the books that made you were. Let me know how they influence you as a reader and as a person. Let me know where your lore started. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!